I think when Rosie and I agreed to do this discussion, we were quite excited, and then we realised we only had 20 minutes, and we can literally talk for hours on the topic. So if anyone wants to ask us any questions after, please come and find us.
Yes, please do interject. And also, massive thank you to Rick for bringing us together. As you say, something really cool happens when you bring two women together to talk about technology. So we're going to go into offensive versus defensive capability and how that's changing. But before we do, I'd like to ask Morgan to tell us a little bit about the global conflict landscape and how it's shaping the security environment today.
Yeah, and I think there's been a common sort of theme and thread from John's keynote speech this morning about threats. So I'm going to start by kind of reiterating that global conflict is redefining the nature of modern security and completely accelerating the pace of innovation in ways that we just simply haven't seen before. We are in an era of persistent disruption, continuous uncertainty, hybrid threats, overlapping risks, continuous adaptation. And Ukraine is a perfect example of this. There'll be many of you, I'm sure, in the audience that have worked in hostile and fragile environments, and conflict often gives us a glimpse into the future. It compresses innovation. It shows us how quickly adversaries adapt capability, how countermeasures are deployed, how people take concept to capability to the front line in timelines that we just wouldn't do in the sort of normal world. And the pace of change completely increases, and we see the emergence of a number of different technologies together to form an end effect on the battlefield. I've had the incredible privilege of spending a year living and working in Ukraine very recently alongside engineering partners over there, military personnel on the front line who are designing from scratch, developing, testing, manufacturing, deploying, readapting, and having this kind of rapid iteration cycle that is quite unbelievable, to be honest. And of course, it's driven by necessity. They're at war, but we're seeing those iteration cycles in weeks and days. Not months or years that we do here in the UK when it comes to defence capability development and procurement. And someone touched on, we'll talk a lot about the technology, but there's definitely a human aspect to this as well. And someone touched on it earlier. The reason why Ukraine has been able to do this is, yes, they're at war, and those that are left in the country are contributing to that effort, to the protection effort. But they work in blended teams, so you'll have engineers with data scientists working alongside end users that are coming back from the front line, and all working together with that with the human loop feedback, but also the data that's being produced on the front line to keep feeding into the development. So I think the ability to be able to learn and adapt is one of the most powerful lessons that's come from Ukraine. And
it's almost taking that startup mentality that the entrepreneurs panel were talking about earlier, isn't it? And just kind of engineering that for the front line. It's quite amazing what's happening.
Yeah, and you're seeing it in the research and development areas, but also in their manufacturing and production lines, which are, I guess if you were going to compare them to the UK, quite rudimental, quite mandrolic, but some are underground. But they're making do with what they've got, and they're being able to hold the front line without a Navy and an Air Force, which is utterly incredible. And a lot of these lessons are definitely shaping defence and military thinking, perhaps not as quick as some of us would quite like, but a lot of those lessons are also quite relevant to the commercial sector as well. And I don't mean like taking all the lessons from the battlefield. I think a lot of it is context and environment dependent, but it's about understanding what happens when threats evolve so rapidly and innovation is driven by survival, and how that innovation is shaping sort of the future security landscape. And then, geopolitical instability. Historically, it was really the states and militaries that worried about geopolitical instability. But now the assets our adversaries really care about sit within the commercial and private sector. So you talk, critical national infrastructure, data centers, supply chains, communication networks. And Russia's had a great strategy over the last 4 years. Every winter, they have made a deliberate attempt and been successful at targeting energy and water supplies in key cities and towns in Ukraine, and it has caused complete disruption and also a massive psychological impact on the communities and the people that live there. I can tell you it's pretty damn grim when it's -5 outside and you've got intermittent or no running water or heating, and you're getting shelled every other night. It's certainly taking the toll on the Ukrainian population at the moment. And we'll have seen, so today, you flip on the other side, the Ukrainians are equally doing the same. It would be 10 hours ago now, the Ukrainian unmanned system forces, which are a big brigade that are responsible for a lot of the drone attacks that you're seeing actually disrupting some Russian territory, targeted Sevastopol, a substation in Sevastopol in Crimea 10 hours ago. It's in complete, darkness. So we're seeing it on both sides, but again, it's targeting the energy infrastructure. So I would say that, for security leaders, it's not whether the lessons that we're seeing play out in the battlefield are relevant to your industry. I think the challenge is about preparing organizations to operate in a world where technology, people, process, and governance all have to keep up. So, it's a tricky one, but I think what we want to talk about is technology. And robots and drones and all sorts of things. So, Rosie, you've spent many years working on robots, deploying them, and similar tech into sort of critical infrastructure and the security domain. When you look at what's been happening globally, in the last 6 to 12, 18 months, what do you think has changed the most in the security technology landscape, and what would you be particularly kind of worried about?
There's a lot to unpick there, but I think the main worry and the main change is the pace that you were talking about. It's not necessarily any one technology, but it's just the speed at which that iteration is happening, which we've never seen before. We're seeing rapid disassembly of COTS parts on the front line, and that is leading to evolutions at so much of a greater speed. As you said, it's days rather than years now. And I think people in the security industry often see those videos of what's happening in Ukraine. We see incredibly complex drone platforms and all sorts of other technologies being deployed. And it can feel like there is this huge chasm forming between what is happening in offensive security and what is happening in defensive security in our organizations today. And to some extent, that is really true, that is there. And then I also sometimes think that it is missing quite a lot of nuance. We have to build those things in different ways for very good reasons. Offensive technologies, they may be single use. They're often optimized for low cost. They can fail. They don't have regulation. There are so many things about deploying something on the front line which we just couldn't do in a defensive organization situation. So that's one thing. And then you look at your defensive technologies, and really you're usually looking for something that can be deployed over a long term. It can be integrated with everything else that you do seamlessly. It can be automated. It is trusted by the people in your organization. It fits in with your processes and your procedures. That's something that does have a 5-year gap from those technologies being deployed on the front line. Now, having said that, there are things that we can do in our organizations to get a little bit closer to that. One of which was alluded to on the entrepreneurs panel earlier, and that's being quicker and having lower barriers to doing our R&D in our organization. So setting up those mini startups, trying, failing fast, without the same layers of regulation and all of those good things that we do need, sort of holding back the technology innovation. So we can definitely do that. But I would also say that there is a lot of great innovation going on in the UK right now with defensive security technology as well, and that we should be reassured by that, and that there are lessons being learned from threats that are being turned into technologies. So, for instance, one of the things we're building at the moment at Createch is we have autonomous system, a fleet of robots, which is designed to go and autonomously respond to a future chemical, biological disaster. So if you take the example of the Salisbury incident, for instance, our fleet of robots and autonomy software would be able to be deployed in response to that kind of incident if that were to happen today. That's a hugely complex system. It's a really innovative technology wherever you go in the world. And that is happening in the UK right now. So it is true that it is quite scary what's going on the front line, and things are evolving rapidly, and there are things that we do need to do within our organisations to be ready for that, to respond to that we're not doing. But you shouldn't judge your own technology maturity on a drone video that you see on social media, I think. Yeah. So I think going back to that, having said that, from your perspective, Morgan, I'm interested in what the offensive capabilities that are developing you think people do need to watch out for. What are the things that you would be keeping a watch on if you were running an organisation in the UK?
And because you mentioned robotics, and last year I was a complete nerd looking at the advancement of robotics in Ukraine, so I was very much on the kind of the strike element, but there was a huge advancement in robotics, so unmanned ground vehicles, and what they were being used for on the front line, which could have similar utility in the commercial sector. So you were seeing what were once hugely built with massive wheels and treads, unmanned ground vehicles, now really small in size, but being used for lots of different things. So whether that's logistics supply, obviously kinetic strike, mine clearance, but one of the key things is the CASEVAC, so the medical evacuation of soldiers that have been held on the front line for, some of them have been out there months without being able to move because of the autonomous systems, the reconnaissance and strike drones monitoring them constantly. But they're using these robots and these unmanned ground vehicles now to autonomously, AI, where they have GPS and they're not in a denied environment, being able to put these soldiers into these robots, close the lid, and then send them away from the front line to where they can be collected. And they're obviously they're saving a lot of lives. So yeah, I was completely fascinated by them, and I can't wait to go back out to Ukraine shortly and see how they've advanced even more.
It's pretty amazing, isn't it? And this is something that you and I can geek over for ages, so we won't. But I think you raise a really important point about robotic platforms and drones being multi-use, and particularly when you come into defensive security, that becomes very important. Yeah. If you're asking an organisation to invest in an asset which is at the moment pretty high cost, it needs to be a Swiss Army knife, and it should be, because there is no reason why the same robot that is doing your perimeter patrol in a critical national infrastructure site can't also be monitoring the temperature of the HVAC system. Yeah. Like, it can be the same platform, and in many cases with very, very, very few adaptations. So there are huge additional benefits outside of security that you should look to when you're building your business case for this kind of thing.
And one last one I'll add is around the US military helicopter that got shot down in the Strait of Hormuz about 10 days ago. They identified and located the pilots in the sea with an uncrewed autonomous surface vessel, which is pretty incredible. But moving on to offensive capability. So there's a couple of things, but I think the first major change is that offensive capabilities are no longer confined to militaries, states, people with the biggest budgets and the most resource. the barrier to entry has collapsed now. Capabilities and technologies that were once seen as sophisticated, exquisite, expensive, are now cheaper, scalable, often modular, adaptable, and a lot of them are commercially available. Ukraine, again, perfect example. You'll have all, I'm sure, read about all of these kind of vignettes, but you're seeing Ukraine's using low-cost drones to deliver strategic effects, so both in terms of disruption, increasing lethality, so strike drones, increasing the amount of data and information that's collected in certain areas. Russians are equally as good as the Ukrainians at this, where they are actually using drones and families of drones. So you'll have seen in the media from 200, 300, 400, 500, 600 now, launches of Shahed style, so 136 drones, or the equivalents, as saturation techniques for the Ukrainian air defenses. So they'll launch 500 drones. Some of them don't even have payloads on them. They are dummies. They have nothing on them, but they delivered the desired effect to saturate Ukrainian air defense systems, and they're incredibly low cost. And then more recently, what we've seen play out in the Gulf with the Iranians launching their Shaheds that are anywhere between, I think, 20 and 50,000 US dollars, targeting US Air Force, US bases in Gulf states, being, shot down by incredibly expensive US Patriot missile systems and other systems that cost up to £1 million a shot, which is crazy. So we need to think about the economics of security differently, because many of the threats are a lot cheaper than the defenses that we're deploying against them, and that's equally relevant for the commercial sector too.
It's a really interesting point, because it's quite tough to make that a reality within, certainly in UK defence, because all over the world we're seeing people use commercial off-the-shelf parts, so just COTS parts, and a lot of this will be just procured from China, say assembled together and then sent out to do a job once. We just can't do that. And that means there's a huge tax, basically, in between offensive and defensive, where you've got potentially something that is exactly the same capability that's going to cost like 4 times as much, if not more. And it is a challenge that we need to think about when we're thinking about defensive technologies.
Yeah, and there's you'll have heard the term sort of dual use being used quite a lot at the moment, and it's incredibly relevant, both in the military and commercial markets, for creating both economic advantage and security advantage. Technology is driving offensive innovation, and a lot of that development is coming directly from the commercial sector, because it's quicker, often cheaper than what the government and the big sort of defense primes can do. And this is anywhere from AI, sensors, PCB circuit boards, navigation systems, comms units. They're all coming from the commercial sector, which is, I'll use another example. So Starlink, for instance, is the network and comms of choice in Ukraine. Without Starlink, they'd be completely screwed, in all honesty. But it's deployed everywhere. It's the only thing that works in a lot of the environments that the teams are operating in. The second major shift is, and this has been mentioned earlier as well, is about the convergence of physical, digital, cyber, and autonomous threats. We're no longer talking about separate threats and risks. We're seeing AI-enabled systems, physical assets, autonomous platforms, sensors, all creating a digital attack surface that's all connected. And all operating together simultaneously. And that's only going to get quicker, cheaper, and easier to do as innovation continues. And in the defense domain, we call this multi-domain integration. So the orchestration of physical platforms, sensors, software, both from sea, land, air, and space, all operating simultaneously in orchestration to deliver whatever end effect that you want to achieve. And this is equally as relevant to the commercial security sector, where when you're thinking about layered security approaches, you're thinking about increasing the amount of time and the amount of data that will allow you to make an informed decision about what are you detecting, what are you identifying, how are you assessing that threat, and then how are you responding to that threat. So it's all very much interlinked. Threats are becoming more connected, so the security has to be way more connected. And again, I think the challenge for security leaders is that many organizations are still, we spoke about silos, but it's true, you still, and even in government, so it's not just in the private sector, still structured in, individual threat domains and silos, which makes it really difficult to operate.
Yeah, I think it's moving from that mindset of security being about responding to a series of isolated events to actually you're running a continuous system which is always thinking, always taking data, and always responding. And that's quite a big ask from where we are in many organizations today. We are seeing a move towards more autonomous decision-making, more layering of sensing, and more kind of humans becoming the decision makers, not the data gatherers, and that was touched upon earlier, which I think is a great use of human time and effort. But I think you only really realize the benefit from layering multiple security systems if you get systems integration really, really right. And embedding a new technology in your business is usually maybe 5% about the technology itself. I go into organizations, we might do a 3-year project to look at adoption of robotic systems. And actually, I talk about regulation, business case, safety, physical, cybersecurity, people, culture change, before I ever talk about the technology. Because if the technology doesn't already exist today, it is coming pretty soon. And you can be sure that it will be quicker than the time it will take you to get your organization ready to embed it. So I think, I've noticed we've only got a little bit of time, so that would be kind of like my parting one message today is don't be thinking about the specification sheet on a new technology that you're looking at. Be thinking about the time that it's going to take to get that integrated within your security systems and within your business. Morgan, do you have a one line before we go?
20 seconds. I think I would challenge everyone here to ask themselves one question. If your organization was designed from scratch today to deal with the threats of 2030, would it look anything like the organization that you're operating right now? Because if it doesn't, I think you need to seriously start thinking about it, because the technology and innovation is just going to keep accelerating at a pace that we're just not going to be able to keep up with. Bang on time.
Yeah,
I'm impressed.